The rain poured down hard on Fifth Avenue as 10-year-old Amara huddled in the doorway of the Grand Plaza Hotel. Her worn-out sneakers were soaked, and her stomach growled from hunger. She'd been living on the street since her grandmother died, 6 months ago, with no other family to take her in. Just another hour, she whispered to herself, watching wealthy people rush by with their umbrellas. Then maybe the rain will stop. That's when she saw it, a black leather wallet lying near the revolving doors. Amara looked around, but nobody seemed to notice it. Her small hands shook as she picked it up. Inside was a credit card with gold letters that spelled out Dominic Grayson. "Hey, isn't that the rich guy from TV?" said Tommy, another street kid who sometimes shared food with her. He pointed at a magazine in the hotel's gift shop window. There was Dominic Grayson's face on the cover, with the words, "New York's youngest, billionaire." Amara's heart beat faster. She knew she should try to return it, but then she thought about little Sarah, who was sick with fever in the abandoned building where they stayed. And old Mr. Pete, who couldn't walk well anymore and needed medicine. Maybe this was her chance to help everyone. She walked into Wilson's department store, still dripping from the rain. The cashier, Linda Wilson, looked at her suspiciously. "Can I help you?" Amara's voice trembled. "I want to buy a home." Linda almost dropped the phone she was holding. "Excuse me?" "A home," Amara said more firmly, "for me and my friends who live on the street. We're cold and hungry and Sarah's really sick." Linda looked at the credit card Amara held out, then at the small girl with determined eyes. Something about the child's sincerity touched her heart. "Honey, I need to make a phone call first." 20 minutes later, a black Mercedes pulled up outside. Dominic Grayson stepped out, his expensive suit getting wet as he hurried inside. He was expecting to find a thief. Instead, he found a little girl who looked like she hadn't eaten in days. "You have my credit card?" he asked, his voice stern. Amara nodded, holding it out. "I'm sorry, sir, I just wanted to help my friends." "Your friends?" "The other kids, and Mr. Pete. We all stay together in the old building on Mason Street. Sarah's really sick and we can't take her to a doctor." Dominic's expression changed as he listened to Amara's story. He'd grown up poor himself, but years of dealing with people trying to scam him had made him cynical. This little girl, though, there was something different about her. "Show me," he said suddenly. "What?" "Show me where your friends are, right now." Amara led Dominic through the rainy streets to the abandoned building. What he saw there changed his life forever. Children huddled together for warmth. An elderly man with a bad leg trying to comfort a feverish little girl. People helping each other despite having nothing themselves. "I'll make you a deal," Dominic said, kneeling down to Amara's level. "I won't press charges about the credit card. Instead, I'm going to help. But you have to promise to let me do this the right way." Tears filled Amara's eyes as she nodded. She didn't know it then, but this rainy evening would change not just her life, but the lives of everyone around her. And for Dominic Grayson, the man who thought he had everything, it would be the beginning of finding what he never knew he was missing. Right at that moment, Victoria Pierce, Dominic's fiancée, was shopping at Saks Fifth Avenue, completely unaware that her perfectly planned future was about to take an unexpected turn. And somewhere in a high-rise office, Dominic's brother Richard was making secret deals that would soon threaten everything they were about to build. The rain kept falling outside, but for the first time in months, Amara felt hope warming her heart. She didn't know about the struggles ahead, the betrayals, or the surprising love that would grow from this chance encounter. She just knew that finally someone had listened. "We'll start by getting Sarah to a doctor," Dominic said, pulling out his phone, "and then we'll figure out the rest." Linda Wilson watched from her store window as they drove away. She smiled, thinking about how a simple act of trust had set something big in motion. In her 30 years running the store, she'd never seen anything quite like this. The local news would soon be buzzing with stories about the billionaire and the homeless girl. Some would call it a publicity stunt. Others would say he was being foolish. But for those who were there that rainy evening, it was simply the moment when two lonely souls found exactly what they needed, even if they didn't know it yet. Victoria Pierce stood in her penthouse apartment, staring at her phone in disbelief. The society pages were buzzing with photos of her fiancé, Dominic, helping a group of homeless people into his car. This wasn't part of her plan at all. He lost his mind," she said to Richard Grayson, Dominic's brother, who sat on her white leather couch. "All our careful planning, and now he's playing savior to street kids." Richard swirled his whiskey, his face dark with anger. "He's always been too soft. That's why I should be running the company, not him." They'd been secretly meeting for months, planning to take control of Grayson Enterprises. Victoria would marry Dominic, then gradually convince him to step back from the company. Richard would take over, and Victoria would get a generous divorce settlement. But now this homeless girl was threatening everything. Meanwhile, at St. Mary's Hospital, Dominic sat beside little Sarah's bed while doctors treated her fever. Amara hadn't left Sarah's side, holding her friend's hand and whispering encouragement. "Mr. Grayson," a nurse said, "there's a reporter in the lobby asking for a statement." "No press," Dominic said firmly. "This isn't about publicity." But his phone kept buzzing with messages. His board members wanted an emergency meeting. Victoria had called 12 times. Even his mother was demanding to know what he was thinking. "Are we in trouble?" Amara asked quietly. Dominic smiled at her. "No, sweetheart. Sometimes doing the right thing makes people uncomfortable, but that doesn't make it wrong." He meant what he said, but he didn't know that in his office, Richard was already meeting with the board members. "My brother has clearly lost his grip on reality," Richard told them, showing photos of Dominic with the homeless group. "First these street children, what next? We need to protect the company." Margaret Chen, the longest-serving board member, wasn't convinced. "Dominic has tripled our profits in 5 years. He's earned some trust." "Has he?" Richard pulled out a folder. "These documents show some very questionable decisions lately." What he didn't say was that he had falsified those documents himself. Back at the hospital, Linda Wilson arrived with food and clean clothes for everyone. She'd closed her store, early to help. "My Henry would have done the same," she said, thinking of her late husband. "He always said money was worthless if you couldn't help others with it." Dominic watched as Amara helped distribute sandwiches to the other kids. She made sure everyone else ate, before taking any food herself. Her kindness reminded him of his father, who had built Grayson Enterprises from nothing, always putting others first. "Your father would be proud," said Martha, Dominic's housekeeper of 30 years who had arrived to help. She was the only one who still talked about him since his death 2 years ago. Victoria had redecorated the house, removing all his photos, saying they needed a fresh start. That evening, Dominic made some calls. By midnight, he had rented an entire floor of the Parkview Hotel. Everyone would have a warm bed tonight, and tomorrow they'd figure out something more permanent. But Victoria was waiting in his office when he finally got there. "Have you lost your mind?" she demanded. "Do you know what this looks like?" "It looks like helping people who need it," Dominic said. "It looks like you're having a breakdown. The board is worried. Richard says—" "Richard," Dominic's voice sharpened. "Since when do you talk to my brother about business?" Victoria realized her mistake too late. She quickly changed the subject, moving closer to straighten his tie the way she always did when she wanted to distract him. "Darling, I'm just worried about you. These street people could be dangerous. They could be using you. Like someone else I know?" The words slipped out before he could stop them. Victoria's eyes flashed with anger, but she quickly covered it with a hurt look. "I don't deserve that. I love you. I just want what's best for you." But for the first time, Dominic wondered if that was true. He thought about Amara, sharing her food when she was starving herself. He thought about his father, who had helped him with his homework even after 16-hour workdays. "I need some time to think," he said. "About what? About us?" Victoria's voice rose. "Because of some little street rat. Her name is Amara," Dominic said quietly. "And she has more integrity than most adults I know." He left Victoria standing there, her perfect makeup not quite hiding her fury. She waited until he was gone, then made a phone call. "Richard, we have a problem. He's suspicious. We need to move faster." In his car, Dominic's phone buzzed with a message from his bank. Someone was trying to access his private accounts, someone with his passwords. And at the Parkview Hotel, Amara sat by the window, watching the city lights. For the first time in months, she wasn't hungry or cold, but something felt wrong. She'd seen the way Victoria looked at her when she visited the hospital. It reminded her of the way her stepfather used to look at her mum right before everything fell apart. "Please let this last," she whispered to the night sky. "Please let him be different." She didn't know that across town, Richard was meeting with someone who had known her mother, someone who could destroy everything with one well-placed lie. The next morning, Maria Torres sat nervously in Richard Grayson's office. She hadn't seen Amara in 3 years, not since that terrible night when everything went wrong. "So you're saying you're her aunt?" Richard asked, pouring her another cup of coffee. Maria nodded, clutching her purse. "Her mother was my sister, but after what happened, I couldn't take care of her. I tried to find her, but... And you're willing to testify to that, to claim custody, for the right price, Maria said quietly. She hated herself for it, but the money Richard offered would solve all her problems. Meanwhile, Dominic was meeting with his security team. Someone had tried to access his accounts 5 times during the night. The IP address traced back to Victoria's apartment building. Sir, his head of security said, there's something else. We found these in Miss Pierce's desk. He handed over photographs of confidential company documents. Dominic felt sick. The woman he'd planned to marry had been spying on him. But why? At the Parkview Hotel, Linda Wilson was helping Amara and the other children settle in. She'd brought books and games and even convinced the hotel chef to teach them how to make cookies. My mom used to bake cookies, Amara said suddenly, her hands covered in flour. Before she got sick, before he came. Linda stopped what she was doing. Before who came, honey? My stepfather. Amara's voice got quieter. He wasn't nice like Mr. Grayson. He hurt people. In another part of the hotel, Martha the housekeeper was making beds when she overheard Victoria on her phone in the hallway. I don't care what it takes, Victoria was saying. That brat is ruining everything. Find something we can use against her. Everyone has secrets. Martha's hands shook as she dialed Dominic's number. She'd watched him grow up, had dried his tears. When his mother left, had supported him when his father died. She couldn't stay quiet now. You need to know what I just heard, she said when he answered. Across town, Richard was meeting with James Sullivan, a reporter known for destroying reputations. I've got a story for you, Richard said, sliding an envelope across the table. My brother, the great Dominic Grayson, is being manipulated by con artists, a gang using a child to play on his emotions. Here's proof of their criminal records. The documents were fake, but Sullivan didn't need to know that. Back at the hotel, Amara was teaching Sarah how to read when Dominic arrived. The sight of them together, one girl patiently helping another, made his heart ache. How had he never noticed how empty his life was before? Mr. Grayson? Amara looked up. Are you okay? You look sad. I'm not sad, he said, sitting down with them. I'm just realizing some important things. That's when his phone buzzed with an urgent message. The board had called an emergency vote. Richard was trying to have him declared mentally unfit to run the company. I have to go, he said, standing up, but I'll be back soon, I promise. That's what my mum said, Amara whispered. But she never came back. Dominic knelt down beside her. I'm not going anywhere, Amara. Some people might try to cause trouble, but I'm not giving up on you. Any of you. As he drove to the office, his brother's words from years ago came back to him. You're too soft, just like Dad. That's why you'll never survive in this business. But maybe being soft wasn't a weakness. Maybe it was exactly what made him strong. In the boardroom, Richard was already speaking when Dominic walked in. As you can see from these documents, my brother's recent behavior is exactly what this company needs, Dominic interrupted. He walked to the front of the room, facing the board members he'd known for years. My father built this company to help people, not just make money. Somewhere along the way, we forgot that. Margaret Chen spoke up. Richard says you're being conned, that these people are criminals. Then he's lying, just like he lied about those documents he showed you. Dominic pulled out his phone, playing a recording. It was Richard and Victoria planning everything. Martha had recorded their conversation in the hallway. The old housekeeper had saved him, just like she always did. Richard's face went pale. You can't prove... Actually, I can. Victoria kept records of everything. She was planning to betray you too, Richard. The police have it all now. The boardroom erupted in chaos. Richard tried to run, but security was waiting outside. Victoria's face flashed on the TV in the corner. She was being led out of her apartment in handcuffs. But Dominic wasn't done. There's one more thing you should know. Tomorrow's paper will announce that Grayson Enterprises is launching a new foundation. We're going to help homeless families get back on their feet, and a very special 10-year-old girl is going to help us do it right. As he drove back to the hotel, Dominic felt lighter than he had in years, but he didn't know that Maria Torres was waiting there ready to claim her niece. And in the parking garage, James Sullivan was preparing to publish his story, not caring that it was based on lies. The real test was just beginning. The morning newspapers hit the stands with explosive headlines: Grayson's child scam exposed, and Billionaire's charity case, The Dark Truth. James Sullivan's article painted a horrible picture, claiming Amara and her friends were part of an organized crime ring targeting wealthy marks. Linda Wilson threw the paper in the trash before any of the children could see it. But she couldn't throw away the TV news vans gathering outside the Parkview Hotel or delete the cruel comments spreading online. "Mr. Grayson," Amara's small voice made Dominic look up from his phone. "Are those people outside because of us?" Before he could answer, the hotel room door opened. Maria Torres walked in, followed by two social workers. "Amara," Maria stepped forward. "I'm your Aunt Maria, your mother's sister." Amara backed away, shaking her head. "My mum didn't have a sister. She told me all about her family." "Of course she'd say that," Maria replied smoothly. "After what happened with your stepfather, she wanted to protect you. But I'm here now, Mijita. I can take care of you." Dominic noticed how Amara trembled at the mention of her stepfather. He stepped between her and Maria. "We'll need to verify your claim legally." "Already done." One of the social workers handed over papers. "Ms. Torres has provided birth certificates and family photos. As the only living relative, she has priority for custody." Sarah started crying. Tommy kicked a chair. The other children watched with fear in their eyes. They'd seen too many families broken apart before. "You can't take her," Sarah sobbed. "She's our family now." Martha, who had been quietly watching, spoke up. "There's something wrong here. The timing is too perfect." She was right. Right after Richard's plans failed, this woman appears. Dominic's instincts screamed that this was another attack. "My lawyers will need to review everything," he said firmly. "Until then, Amara stays here under my temporary guardianship." "That's not how this works," the second social worker started, but Dominic cut her off. "Actually, it is. I filed emergency guardianship papers yesterday." He hadn't, but his lawyers would have them ready within the hour. Being a billionaire had its advantages. Maria's friendly mask slipped for a moment. "You can't keep her from her real family." "Real family?" Linda Wilson stepped forward, anger in her voice. "Where were you 3 years ago when she needed you? Where were you last week when she was sleeping in doorways?" The confrontation was interrupted by a commotion in the hallway. Detective Sarah Rodriguez from Special Victims Unit pushed past the hotel security. "Maria Torres?" The detective held up her badge. "We need to talk about your connection to Frank Martinez." Amara went pale at that name. That's my stepfather." Detective Rodriguez's face softened. "Yes, honey, we've been looking for him, and your aunt here has been helping him hide from us." Maria tried to run, but police officers were already blocking the door. As they led her away in handcuffs, she screamed at Richard Grayson's voicemail. "You promised to protect me, you promised." But the drama wasn't over. James Sullivan showed up with a camera crew, pushing into the hotel room. "Mr. Grayson, care to comment on reports that this is all a publicity stunt, that you're using these children to improve your image?" Dominic was about to have security remove them when Amara stepped forward. "Mr. Grayson saved my life," she said clearly into the cameras. "He saved all our lives. The only people lying are the ones trying to hurt him for being kind." The room fell silent. This little girl, who had every reason to distrust adults, was standing up for the truth. Even Sullivan looked uncomfortable. "Out," Dominic ordered, and this time no one argued. Later that night, after the chaos had died down, Dominic found Amara sitting alone by the window. "Want to talk about it?" he asked gently. She was quiet for a long moment. "My stepfather was a bad man. He hurt my mum. Then one day she tried to run away with me, but..." Tears rolled down her face. "The police said she had an accident, but I knew it wasn't an accident." Dominic's heart broke. He'd lost his own mother young, though to illness, not violence. "Is that why you were on the streets? Running from him?" Amara nodded. "I was scared he'd find me. I'm still scared." "Listen to me," Dominic said, kneeling beside her chair. "He will never hurt you again, I promise." "How can you be sure?" "Because Detective Rodriguez has been building a case against him for years. Your aunt's arrest will lead them right to him. And until then, you have an entire hotel full of people who will protect you." As if on cue, Sarah and Tommy came running in with hot chocolate that Martha had made. Linda Wilson arrived with new books. Even Margaret Chen from the board stopped by with Chinese food for everyone. "See?" Dominic smiled. "This is your family now, all of us." But outside the hotel, Richard Grayson was meeting with his last ally, Frank Martinez himself. The man was everything evil that Amara remembered, and he was angry. "You promised me money to disappear," Frank snarled. "Now the cops are closing in. Time for Plan B." Richard's face went pale. "We agreed. No violence." Frank laughed coldly. "You don't get to make the rules anymore, rich boy." Either you help me get what I want, or I tell the police all about our little arrangement. In the hotel room, Amara finally fell asleep surrounded by her friends. Dominic watched over them, not knowing that the biggest fight was still to come. Tomorrow's papers would bring more lies, more accusations, but for tonight at least they were safe. Martha touched his shoulder gently. Your father would be so proud of you. I hope so, Dominic said softly. I'm just trying to do what's right. That's exactly why he'd be proud. The next morning, Victoria Pierce sat in an interrogation room at the police station, her designer outfit wrinkled from a night in jail. Detective Rodriguez laid out photographs on the table, Victoria meeting with Richard, with Maria Torres, and finally with Frank Martinez. Start talking, the detective said. Your friends are all turning on each other. Better be first. With the truth. Victoria's perfect makeup couldn't hide her fear. You don't understand. Richard said it would be simple. Just help him take control of the company. I didn't know about Martinez until it was too late. And then? Then he threatened to expose me if I didn't help him hide. Said he'd tell everyone what I did to Dominic's father. Detective Rodriguez leaned forward. What did you do to Jonathan Grayson? At the Parkview Hotel, Dominic was meeting with his security team. They'd found surveillance footage of Richard meeting with a man matching Frank Martinez's description. Suatusa, he was here. Dominic's voice shook with anger. Outside the hotel? 2 days ago, the security chief confirmed. And sir, he had blueprints of the building. Martha burst into the room. Amara's gone. What? Dominic ran to the children's. Sweet. Sarah was crying, Tommy was yelling, and Linda Wilson was trying to calm everyone down. She left a note, Linda said, handing him a piece of paper. In childish handwriting it read, I saw him watching the hotel. He'll hurt everyone because of me. I have to go. I'm sorry. Love, Amara. She's trying to protect us, Martha said softly. Just like her mother tried to protect her. Dominic was already calling Detective Rodriguez, but before he could reach her, his phone rang. It was Richard. Missing something, brother? If anything happens to her, shut up and listen, Richard snapped. Martinez has her. He'll trade her for $5 million and a guarantee that no one presses charges against me. Let me talk to her. There was a rustling sound, then Amara's voice. Mr. Grayson? Don't listen to them, they... Her voice cut off. Midnight, Richard said. The old candy factory on West Street. Come alone or she dies. At the police station, Victoria was finally breaking down. Jonathan Grayson found out what Richard and I were planning. He confronted us that night, said he was going to expose everything. Richard pushed him and he fell. We made it look like a heart attack. Detective Rodriguez stared at her. You killed Dominic's father? Richard did. I helped cover it up. Victoria started sobbing. And then Martinez found out somehow. He's been blackmailing us ever since. Back at the hotel, Dominic was going crazy with worry when his phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. It was a photo of a young woman who looked just like Amara, with a message. I know where he's really taking her. Meet me at St. Michael's Church. Come alone. Elena, Martha gasped when she saw the photo. That's Amara's mother. But she's supposed to be dead. It's a trap, his security chief warned. Maybe, Dominic said, but what if it's not? Linda Wilson stepped forward. I'm coming with you. No, I have to go alone. Like hell you do, Linda said firmly. That little girl is family now to all of us. One by one, they all insisted on helping. Even Margaret Chen arrived with the entire board of directors. We were wrong about her, Margaret said. We won't fail her again. At St. Michael's Church, a woman in a hoodie was waiting in the shadows. When she stepped into the light, there was no doubt. This was Amara's mother, Elena Martinez. They told me she died in the fire, Elena said, her voice shaking. Frank set it to collect the insurance money. I got out, but I thought my baby. She started crying. Then last night, I saw her picture in the news. My Amara, alive. Why didn't you come forward right away? Because I know my husband. The candy factory is a trap. He's taking her to the old fishing pier. That's where She steadied herself. That's where he takes people who know too much. Detective Rodriguez arrived with her team. We found Martinez's van heading toward the pier, but Richard and Victoria's confessions give us something else. Proof that Martinez killed 3 other women. We've got him on murder charges if we can catch him. Dominic's phone rang again. It was Martha. Sir, you need to see the evening news. Now. Every channel was showing the same footage. Security video of Richard and Victoria in Jonathan Grayson's office the night he died. Someone had leaked it to the press. I did, Margaret Chen said quietly. The world needs to know the truth, all of it. They set up their trap at the pier, but Dominic was worried. She must be so scared. Elena touched his arm. My daughter survived 3 years on the streets. She's stronger than anyone knows. At that moment, Amara was proving her mother right. In Martinez's van, she was secretly unraveling the rope around her wrists, just like Tommy had taught her. She'd lived through too much to give up now, and she wasn't alone anymore. She had a family coming for her, a real family, built not from blood, but from love. The pier lights flickered in the distance as multiple cars approached. The final confrontation was about to begin, and nothing would ever be the same. Thunder rumbled over the pier as Frank Martinez's van pulled up to the abandoned warehouse. The air smelled like rain and rust, and the old wooden boards creaked under the tires. "End of the line, kid," Martinez growled, yanking Amara from the van. He didn't notice that her ropes were already loose, or that she'd managed to turn on the old cell phone she'd found under the van's seat. Inside the warehouse, Richard paced nervously. "This wasn't the plan. We were supposed to get the money and leave." "Plans change," Martinez said, shoving Amara toward a rusty chair. "Your brothers caused me too much trouble. Time to end this permanently." Meanwhile, Elena was helping Detective Rodriguez's team surround the warehouse. "There's a back entrance through the old loading dock," she whispered. "Frank never thinks anyone remembers it." Dominic wanted to rush in immediately, but Linda Wilson held him back. "We do this smart," she said, "for Amara." Inside, Amara was doing exactly what old Mr. Pete had taught her during their months on the street, watching, waiting, and staying calm even when scared. "Your mother was stupid too," Martinez was telling her, waving his gun around as he bragged. "Thought she could outsmart me. The fire was supposed to finish both of you off, but you got away somehow. Been a thorn in my side ever since." Richard looked sick. "You said nobody would get hurt." Martinez laughed. "Rich boy, people like you are all the same. Want to play tough but can't handle the real thing." He pointed his gun at Richard. "Sit down and shut up." Thunder crashed again and the old warehouse lights flickered. That's when Amara saw something through the dirty window, a familiar shadow moving in the darkness. Detective Rodriguez's voice boomed through a megaphone. "Frank Martinez, we have the building surrounded. Come out with your hands up." Martinez grabbed Amara, using her as a shield. "Try anything and she dies just like her mother. My mother isn't dead." The words came out clear and strong, making Martinez's hand shake. "What did you say?" "I saw her picture in your wallet. The one you look at when you think no one's watching. It was taken last month. She's alive and you know it." For the first time, fear crossed Martinez's face. Richard saw his chance and tried to run, but Martinez's gun swung toward him. That's when everything happened at once. Amara stomped hard on Martinez's foot and twisted away, just like Elena had taught her years ago. The gun went off, hitting Richard in the shoulder. Lightning flashed, plunging the warehouse into darkness for a crucial second. When the lights came back on, Elena Martinez stood in the doorway. "Hello, Frank?" Martinez's face went white. "You're dead. I killed you." "You failed," Elena said, "just like you failed at everything else." He raised his gun with a roar of rage, but Amara was ready. She threw the heavy flashlight from the van, hitting his hand. The gun clattered to the ground, just as the police burst in from all sides. "Frank Martinez, you're under arrest for attempted murder, kidnapping, and the murders of Janet Torres, Lisa Cooper, and Michelle Banks," Detective Rodriguez announced, handcuffing him. Richard tried to crawl away in the chaos, but found Linda Wilson blocking his path. The sweet-faced store owner had a surprisingly mean right hook. "That's for Jonathan Grayson," she said as he crumpled to the floor. Dominic ran to Amara, wrapping her in his arms. "Are you hurt? I was so worried." "I knew you'd come," Amara said simply. Then she saw Elena and froze. "Mom?" Elena fell to her knees, opening her arms. "My baby, my brave, beautiful baby." Their reunion was interrupted by Martinez's angry shout. "This changes nothing. I still have proof about what Richard and Victoria did. I'm not going down alone." "Actually," Margaret Chen stepped forward, "those confessions are already public, and the DA has granted Victoria partial immunity for her testimony. It's over, Frank. You and Richard have lost everything." Outside, reporters were gathering in the rain. The story was too big to ignore. Attempted murder, kidnapping, a family reunion, and the downfall of one of New York's most prominent families. But Dominic had stopped caring about headlines. He watched as Amara hugged her mother, both of them crying and laughing at the same time. Sarah, Tommy, and the other children rushed forward to join them, creating a circle of joy in the middle of the grimy warehouse. Martha touched his arm gently. "What happens now?" "Now?" Dominic smiled. "Now we build something new, together." Back at the Parkview Hotel, Linda Wilson was already planning a celebration dinner. Margaret Chen was drawing up papers for the new charitable foundation. Detective Rodriguez was finally closing the files on 3 cold cases, bringing peace to other families touched by Martinez's evil. But in his cell, Richard Grayson made one last phone call, and somewhere in the city, someone who hated Dominic even more than Richard did answered that call. The storm was passing, but another one was already brewing on the horizon. The morning after the warehouse showdown, the headlines were everywhere. Grayson family scandal explodes, and long-lost mother returns to save daughter. But inside the Parkview Hotel's presidential suite, none of that mattered. Amara sat between Dominic and Elena on the plush sofa, hardly able to believe this wasn't a dream. Her mother was alive, she was safe, and somehow her little street family had grown into something bigger than she'd ever imagined. "So what happens now?" Sarah asked, voicing what everyone was thinking. Elena squeezed her daughter's hand. "I have an apartment in Boston. It's small, but..." "No," Sarah burst into tears. "Amara can't leave. We need her." The other children joined in, creating such a commotion that Martha had to bring in hot chocolate to calm everyone down. "Nobody's leaving," Dominic said firmly. "Elena, there's plenty of room at my house. You and Amara could have the entire East Wing." Linda Wilson nodded approvingly. "And I happen to know the old community center on Oak Street is for sale. Perfect place for that foundation you're planning." But their planning was interrupted by Dominic's lawyer, Andrew Parker. "We have a problem. Richard's wife, Charlotte, is contesting everything. She claims Richard was acting under duress and that you," he pointed at Dominic, "orchestrated this whole scandal to steal the company." "That's ridiculous," Martha exclaimed. "It gets worse," Andrew continued. "She's filed for emergency conservatorship over Richard's shares in the company, claiming he's mentally unfit after the trauma you put him through." Eleanor stood up, her eyes flashing. "That man helped my husband try to kill my daughter, and she's calling him the victim." Meanwhile, in the prison visiting room, Charlotte Grayson sat across from her husband. Her expensive perfume couldn't quite mask the smell of disinfectant. "Everything's in motion," she said quietly. "Jonathan's old friend Judge Matthews owes me a favor. He'll grant the conservatorship." Richard smiled for the first time since his arrest. "And the other thing?" "Already done. Dominic won't know what hit him." Back at the hotel, Margaret Chen arrived with more news. "The board is splitting. Half of them believe Charlotte's claims. They're calling for a vote of no confidence." Dominic felt the weight of it all crushing down. He'd thought catching Martinez would end this, but it seemed the fight was just beginning. That's when Amara spoke up. "When I lived on the streets, Mr. Pete taught me something. He said bullies are like stray dogs. They only have power if you run from them." "She's right," Elena said. "I spent 3 years running and hiding. Look where that got us." Linda Wilson stood up, her usual gentle manner replaced by determination. "Then we fight back. I've got 30 years of customer records. Let's see. How many of Charlotte's society friends have been cooking their books?" Martha disappeared into the kitchen and came back with a box of old photographs. "Your father gave me these for safekeeping, Dominic. Said they might be needed someday." The photos showed Jonathan Grayson with Judge Matthews at some very questionable private parties. Dad knew, Dominic realized. He knew they might try something. Like this? But Charlotte had her own surprise waiting. That afternoon, every major news outlet received an anonymous envelope. Inside were documents appearing to show that Dominic had been embezzling money for years, using the homeless shelter scheme as a cover. "The signatures are forged," Andrew said after examining them. "But proving that will take time. Time we don't have," Margaret added. "The stock is already dropping." Elena paced the room, thinking hard. "Martinez kept records of everything. He was paranoid that way. If we could find his hidden files..." "Already on it," Detective Rodriguez said from the doorway. "We found a storage unit in his name. CSI is going through it now." Sarah tugged on Dominic's sleeve. "Why are rich people so mean?" The innocent question made everyone laugh, breaking the tension. Even Elena smiled, pulling her daughter close. "Not all of them, honey," Linda said, winking at Dominic. "Some of them just need someone special to remind them what really matters." That evening, as storm clouds gathered again over the city, Charlotte Grayson met secretly with someone in a darkened car. "Everything's falling apart," she said. "We need to move faster." The stranger handed her a file. "Use this. By the time they prove it's fake, the damage will be done. But they didn't know about Tommy, who'd followed Charlotte from the prison. Living on the streets had taught him how to be invisible. Now he huddled behind a dumpster, recording everything on the phone Dominic had given him. In the hotel suite, Amara was helping Sarah with her reading when Elena and Dominic came in. "We need to talk," Elena said seriously. "All of us." The children gathered around, worry on their faces. They'd had too many talks that ended with families being torn apart. "How would you all feel," Dominic began, "about making this permanent?" "Legally," Eleanor smiled. "What he's trying to say is, how would you like to be a real family, all of us?" The room erupted in cheers, but outside Charlotte's plan was already in motion, and this time she wasn't just aiming to hurt Dominic's reputation, she wanted to destroy everything and everyone he loved. The next morning, Tommy burst into the hotel suite out of breath from running. "Mr. Grayson, you need to see this." He pulled out his phone and played the video he'd recorded. There was Charlotte, clear as day, meeting with someone in the shadows. "I want them all gone," Charlotte was saying. "The company, the money, everything. Make it look like an accident, just like we did with Jonathan." Eleanor gasped. "That voice, in the shadows. I know it. It's Howard Blake, Dad's old business partner." Dominic looked confused. "The one who disappeared after the merger fell through." "He didn't disappear," Martha said quietly. "Your father found out he was stealing from the company, gave him a choice, leave town or face charges." Detective Rodriguez took the phone. "This is good work, Tommy, but we need more than a dark video to prove anything." Meanwhile, at the prison, Victoria was having second thoughts about her deal with the DA. Richard had just told her about Charlotte's plans. "They're going to kill them," she whispered to her lawyer. "All of them, even the children. Are you willing to testify to that?" Victoria thought about Amara's brave little face at the warehouse. "Yes, but you have to protect me. Howard Blake doesn't leave loose ends." Back at the hotel, Linda Wilson was organizing moving boxes. They'd finally found the perfect building for the new shelter, an old school with plenty of rooms and a big playground. "Look what I found in the basement." Sarah came running up with a dusty photo album. Inside were pictures of the school. From 50 years ago. Dominic looked closer. "Wait, that's Howard Blake. He went to school here." Elena studied the photo. "With your father. Look, they're standing together. And Charlotte's father too," Martha added. "They were all friends once." Margaret Chen arrived with more files from the storage unit. "It goes deeper than that. Blake Construction built half the low-income housing in the city, but the buildings were dangerous, cutting corners, using cheap materials. Your father was about to expose it all. That's why they killed him," Dominic realized, "not just for the company, but to keep this quiet." Amara, who had been quietly listening, spoke up. "Like my stepdad, he hurt people to keep his secrets too." Eleanor hugged her daughter. "But we're not hiding anymore, right? Just..." Then Tommy's phone buzzed with an alert. Charlotte had called a press conference. On every TV channel, Charlotte Grayson stood at a podium, tears in her eyes. "My husband was framed," she declared. "Dominic Grayson orchestrated this whole scandal to steal our share of the company, and now he's using these poor homeless children for publicity." The reporters went wild with questions, but Charlotte wasn't done. "Furthermore, I have proof that Elena Martinez abandoned her daughter years ago. She's an unfit mother trying to cash in on my family's tragedy." Eleanor's hands shook with anger. "That lying..." "Wait," Linda interrupted. "Look behind Charlotte." There, barely visible in the background, was Howard Blake. He was watching Charlotte with a cold smile that sent chills down everyone's spine. "He's getting sloppy," Detective Rodriguez said, "letting himself be seen like that. Because he thinks he's already won," Martha said grimly. That's when the hotel room phone rang. It was Victoria calling from protective custody. "Get out of there," she screamed. "Blake bribed someone at the hotel. The gas lines..." The explosion rocked the entire building. Through the smoke and chaos, Dominic heard Amara screaming for her mother. Sarah was crying. Tommy was trying to help Martha up. "Everyone to the emergency stairs," Linda shouted, taking charge. "Now!" They made it to the street just as the second explosion hit. Charlotte watched from her office across town, her face illuminated by the flames. "Is it done?" she asked Blake. "Not yet," he replied, pulling out his phone. "But soon." What they didn't know was that Detective Rodriguez had evacuated the hotel 10 minutes before the explosion. An anonymous tip from Victoria had given them just enough warning. And in the back of a police van, safely away from the chaos, Amara held her mother's hand while Dominic made a call. It's time, he told Margaret Chen. Release everything. All of it. Are you sure? Margaret asked. Once we do this, there's no going back. Dominic looked at his strange, beautiful new family. Eleanor comforting the children, Linda and Martha making plans, Tommy still clutching his phone with its precious evidence. They tried to kill my father, he said. They tried to kill all of us, no more holding back. As fire trucks raced to the hotel, Howard Blake's phone buzzed with an urgent message. His old school photo was on every news site, along with 40 years of buried secrets. The war for the truth was about to begin. The morning after the hotel explosion, New York woke up to shocking headlines. Blake construction scandal, 40 years of corruption exposed, and Jonathan Grayson's murder, the E.D. real story. Howard Blake stared at the TV in his penthouse office as reporters dug through decades of his crimes. Unsafe buildings, bribes to city officials, connections to criminal organizations. Everything he and Charlotte had tried to hide was now public. How could this happen? Charlotte demanded, pacing the room. We had everything under control. Your husband talked, Blake said coldly. Victoria, too. They're both giving evidence to the DA. At the safe house where Detective Rodriguez had taken everyone, Dominic watched the news with grim satisfaction. Elena sat beside him, helping Sarah and Tommy make breakfast for everyone. Your father tried to stop them, Martha said softly. That's why they killed him. He found out about the faulty construction, the missing safety inspections, and now all those families will finally get justice, Linda Wilson added. She'd spent the morning calling her old customers, gathering even more evidence of Blake's corruption. Amara tugged on Dominic's sleeve. Are the bad people going to hurt us again? Before he could answer, Margaret Chen burst in. They're making their move. Blake just called an emergency shareholders meeting. He's using his old voting rights to try to seize control of the company. But those rights were voided years ago, Dominic protested. They found a loophole. Judge Matthews is helping them, the same judge who covered up your father's murder. Elena stood up, her face determined. Then we find someone who can prove he's corrupt too. Already did, Tommy grinned, holding up his phone. I followed. Him last night. Got pictures of him meeting Blake at that fancy restaurant downtown. They were passing money under the table. Detective Rodriguez smiled. That kid could have a future in surveillance. But their small victory was interrupted by breaking news. Charlotte was holding another press conference, this time with a surprise guest. Ladies and gentlemen, she announced, I'd like you to meet someone. This is Patricia Hayes, Amara's real mother. The cameras showed a woman who did look remarkably like Eleanor. It's all been a lie, Charlotte declared. Elena Martinez is an imposter trying to steal my family's fortune. This is Amara's true mother, and she wants her daughter back. Eleanor's face went white. That's impossible. No, Martha said slowly. It's desperate. Look at her eyes. That woman's terrified. Blake must be forcing her to do this. Dominic was already on the phone with his lawyers, but Amara remained strangely calm. She's not my mum, she said firmly. I remember the song my real mum used to sing to me, the one in Spanish about the little bird. Elena's eyes filled with tears. Pajarito pequeño, she whispered, and began to sing the lullaby softly. Even. Detective Rodriguez was moved. We can do a DNA test, end this once and for all. But Blake had planned for that too. A court order arrived, demanding Amara be placed in protective custody until the matter was resolved. Over my dead body, Elena growled. That can be arranged, came a cold voice from the doorway. Howard Blake stood there with two armed men. Somehow he'd found the safe house. Did you really think I wouldn't have people inside the police department? He laughed. Now let's all take a nice quiet ride. There's an empty construction site waiting for us. But Blake had made one crucial mistake. He'd forgotten about old Mr. Pete, who'd been quietly watching from his wheelchair in the corner. The old man suddenly swung his cane, knocking one gunman off balance. In the chaos that followed, Tommy hit the emergency alert on his phone, something Dominic had given all the children. Linda Wilson showed surprising strength tackling the second gunman. Martha threw a pot of hot coffee in Blake's face, and through it all, Amara's voice rang out clear and strong. You can't hurt us anymore. We're not afraid of you. Police sirens wailed in the distance. Blake tried to run but slipped in the spilled coffee. As he fell, something dropped from his pocket. A key ring with a familiar logo. The old school, Dominic realized. That's where Charlotte's waiting with the fake mother. Eleanor was already moving. Then that's where we're going. All of us. Sarah insisted, and the other children nodded. Detective Rodriguez called for backup, while Linda and Martha got everyone into cars. Mr. Pete insisted on coming too, saying, "I've got one more fight left in me." As they drove through the city, Margaret Chen called with news. The shareholders were meeting in an hour. Everything they'd built was at stake. But something else was hidden in that old school building, something Howard Blake had kept secret for 40 years. And only Amara, with her memories of exploring every corner of the streets, would be able to find it. The final battle for truth, justice, and family was about to begin. Thunder rolled across the city as cars pulled up to the old school building. Rain was starting to fall, just like the night this all began. "The basement?" Amara said suddenly. "When we were looking at those old photos, I saw something in the background. A door that's not on any of the building plans." Inside, Charlotte paced nervously while Patricia Hayes, the fake mother, sat trembling in a chair. "They're coming," Charlotte snapped into her phone. "Where are you, Howard?" But Howard Blake was already in handcuffs, being led into a police car. His secrets were about to come crashing down. Detective Rodriguez positioned her team around the building. "Remember, there might be more armed men inside. Be careful." "Wait," Amara said, grabbing Dominic's hand. "I know another way in, from the streets." Elena nodded proudly. "Lead the way, mi pajarito." While Charlotte watched the front entrance, Amara led her family through a hidden passage she'd discovered during her months of homelessness. It came up right by the basement door she'd seen in the old photo. "It's locked," Tommy whispered. "Not for long," Linda Wilson smiled, pulling out a ring of keys. "I used to volunteer here 30 years ago. Some things never change." The door creaked open to reveal filing cabinets, old blueprints, and a safe built into the wall. "That's Blake Construction's logo," Martha noticed. "And look at this." Margaret Chen pointed to the blueprints. "These show the real materials they used in those buildings. Proof of everything they covered up." Suddenly, footsteps echoed above them. Charlotte's voice rang out. "Check the basement. They have to be here somewhere." "Time for one last performance," Elena whispered, squeezing Amara's hand. Upstairs, Charlotte was threatening Patricia Hayes. "Remember, our deal. You play your part or your brother's hospital bills stop being paid." "Actually," Dominic said, stepping out of the shadows, "I'll be taking care of those bills from now on." Charlotte spun around to find herself surrounded. Eleanor and Amara stood together, their matching eyes filled with strength. Linda Wilson and Martha flanked them protectively. Tommy held up his phone, recording everything. "It's over, Charlotte," Detective Rodriguez said, emerging with her officers. "We found Blake's records in the basement. Everything about the construction fraud, Jonathan's murder, all of it." "You don't understand," Charlotte's voice cracked. "Howard has people everywhere. He'll kill us all." "Howard Blake isn't killing." "Anyone else?" came a familiar voice. Everyone turned to see Richard Grayson in the doorway, supported by Victoria. His arm was still in a sling from the warehouse shooting. "My brother tried to tell me years ago what was happening," Richard said. "I was too greedy to listen, but I'm done being Howard's puppet." Victoria stepped forward. "We both are. We've given the DA everything." Charlotte looked around wildly, seeing her last hopes crumbling. "You're all fools. Money is the only thing that matters in this world." "No," Amara said quietly. "Family matters. Love matters. That's what Mr. Grayson showed me." Outside, police lights flashed as more evidence was carried out. Margaret Chen arrived with news from the shareholders' meeting. "The vote is in, with Richard and Victoria's shares supporting Dominic. Plus the evidence of Blake's crimes, the board has confirmed Dominic's leadership." But Dominic wasn't listening. He was watching Amara and Elena embrace Patricia Hayes, who was sobbing out the whole story of how Blake had threatened her family. "There's room for everyone at the new shelter," Linda Wilson told her kindly. "No one has to be afraid anymore." 1 month later, the old school building had been transformed. Fresh paint, new playground equipment, and dozens of families finding hope again. The sign out front read, "Jonathan Grayson Memorial Community Center." Eleanor ran the education program, helping parents get job training. Linda Wilson organized a network of local businesses to provide employment. Martha kept everything running smoothly, just like always. Richard and Victoria had both served short sentences, then devoted themselves to helping expose other corporate corruption. Sometimes healing means facing your mistakes. As for Dominic and Amara, their story became a symbol of how love could bridge any divide. When the adoption papers were finally signed, making their unusual family official, there wasn't a dry eye in the courthouse. "You know what's funny?" Amara said that evening as everyone gathered for dinner in their new home. "That night I found your wallet. I just wanted to help my friends. I never imagined finding a whole family." "That's the thing about love," Elena smiled, looking around at all of them. Sarah and Tommy arguing over the last roll, Mr. Pete telling his stories, Linda and Martha setting out dishes, Margaret Chen reviewing plans for the Foundation's next project. "It grows bigger than we ever expect." Dominic squeezed Amara's hand. "Your mother's right, and thanks to you we all remembered what really matters." Outside, the city lights twinkled under a clear sky. The storms had passed, leaving behind something stronger than steel and concrete. A family built on love, truth, and second chances. In his office at Grayson Enterprises, Dominic kept that old wallet on his desk, a reminder that sometimes the greatest gifts come in unexpected moments, and that even the smallest act of kindness can change everything. And every night, Elena still sang the lullaby about the little bird who found its way home. The end.